Ezekiel 42. Then he brought me to the outer court, the way toward the north. Then he brought me into the room that was opposite the separate place, which was opposite the building toward the north. Before the length of 100 cubits was the north door, and the width 50 cubits. Opposite the 20 cubits which belonged to the inner court, and opposite the pavement which belonged to the outer court, was gallery against gallery in the third floor. Before the rooms was a walk of 10 cubits width inward, a way of 1 cubit, and their doors were toward the north. Now the upper rooms were shorter, for the galleries took away from these more than from the lower and the middle in the building. For they were in 3 stories, and they didn't have pillars as the pillars of the courts. Therefore the uppermost was set back more than the lowest, and the middle from the ground. The wall that was outside by the side of the rooms, toward the outer court before the rooms, its length was 50 cubits. For the length of the rooms that were in the outer court was 50 cubits. Behold, before the temple were 100 cubits. From under these rooms was the entry on the east side, as one goes into them from the outer court. In the thickness of the wall of the court toward the east, before the separate place, and before the building, there were rooms. The way before them was like the appearance of the rooms, which were toward the north. According to their length, so was their width, and all their exits were both according to their fashions, and according to their doors. According to the doors of the rooms that were toward the south, was a door at the head of the way, even the way directly before the wall toward the east, as one enters into them. Then he said to me, the north rooms and the south rooms, which are before the separate place, are the holy rooms, where the priests who are near to Yahweh shall eat the most holy things. There they shall lay the most holy things, with the meal offering, the sin offering, and the trespass offering, for the place is holy. When the priests enter in, then they shall not go out of the holy place into the outer court, but they shall lay their garment in, which they minister there, for they are holy. Then they shall put on other garments, and shall approach that which is for the people. Now, when he had finished measuring the inner house, he brought me out by the way of the gate, which faces toward the east, and measured it all around. He measured on the east side with the measuring reed 500 reeds, with the measuring reed all around. He measured on the north side 500 reeds, and the measuring reed all around. He measured on the south side 500 reeds, with the measuring reed. He turned about to the west side and measured 500 reeds, with the measuring reed. He measured it on all 4 sides. It had a wall around it, the length 500, and the width 500, to make a separation between that which was holy and that which was common. And so the measuring of this temple continues. Please watch the previous 2 videos, Ezekiel 40 and 41, to get the lowdown on what's going on with that. But we're in the middle of measuring a temple in the middle of a visionary experience of Ezekiel. And some people believe that this is the 3rd temple that is going to be built. So in the history of Israel and the Jewish people, there have been 2 temples so far. So there's been Solomon's temple, which he built around about 1040-ish, about 970-ish BC. And that was the first temple, and it lasted for roughly 400 years. The second temple was then built by Zerubbabel's temple, but then it was renovated by King Herod. So Zerubbabel built quite a basic temple, and we'll talk about that when we get to the minor prophets and like Haggai. But then Herod the Great renovated it and made it absolutely fantastic. And what Herod the Great did was expanded the size of the Temple Mount. So when David and Solomon originally built the temple, there was a certain area of flat space on Mount Moriah that they built that temple on. But later on, when Herod rebuilt it, he made this space gigantic, and he put in this huge retaining wall. And you can actually, even though the temple was destroyed by the Romans, you can actually see that huge retaining wall in Israel still today. That's called the Western Wall or the Wailing Wall, and that's where Jewish people go to pray. If you Google Wailing Wall, you'll see all these rock blocks up. Well, that's this retaining wall on the outside of this hugely expanded Temple Mount area. So that Temple Mount area was expanded, and it, I Googled it the other day. It was, here it is, on its longest side, it's 470 metres, and 280 metres on its shortest side. It's a trapezium four-sided shape of about 140,000 square metres. So that's the Temple Mount today. So if you go to Israel today and you look at that Temple Mount area, it's a big flat area. There's a Muslim mosque built there. It's about 36 or 37 acres in size, which is a fairly big area. And so that is where a lot of people imagine if there was going to be a third temple built, they kind of feel like it's got to be built there. And there's all these people who think that, oh, God has to rebuild a third temple, and we've got to get rid of that Muslim mosque so it can be built on that spot. I personally feel like that we don't need to build a third temple physically, because that's not God's plan. My understanding is that the third temple, the one that's being described here, is a spiritual temple. And any attempt to build another temple and reset up animal sacrifices and all of that is highly offensive to the Lord, because the Lord only used that as a symbol to point to Jesus. Now we've got Jesus, to basically go back to animals and say, we don't need your sacrifice anymore, Jesus. Animals will do. I think is highly offensive. And I don't think it's God's plan for there to be a third physical building. Now, sometimes people in their zeal will try to do things. And so that's another subject. But what's interesting here is that if this building as described was to be built in the spot where everyone thinks a temple should be going, it won't fit. And I worked it out. In the latter part of this chapter, it describes the outer court and describes it as 500 reeds square. 500 reeds this way, 500 reeds this way, a 500 by 500 square. Each reed is 6 cubits, I think I worked out. Where is it? And I worked out that a biblical cubit is 52.4 centimetres. That means that this square is 635 metres in each direction. That is way too big to fit on the existing area. So even though the existing area is 36 or 37 acres, you'd think that's pretty big. The existing size is about 140 to 150,000 square metres. To put the temple that Ezekiel saw in this vision in that spot, we need 403,000 square metres. In other words, we need an area 3 times as big. So it can't fit. Not only would you have to clear the Dome of the Rock, you'd have to clear a lot of other things in Jerusalem and expand the retaining wall a huge distance. In other words, it's not practical to do so. Part of me thinks, I wonder if the Lord did this on purpose, like to try to just make it not possible to do. So I kind of wonder whether, the Lord, having moved on from physical things, just described the spiritual things in impossible terms. I don't know for sure. But there are a lot of theories about what is this temple that Ezekiel's describing. From what I could work out from reading, there are 5 theories, or at least 5 common ones. The first theory is that this is the temple that should have been built by Zerubbabel. So, this is we're referring to this as like the third temple, but actually at the time that Ezekiel had this vision, the second temple hadn't been built yet. The first temple of Solomon had been destroyed, but the second temple of Zerubbabel had not yet been built. So one of the theories is, Zerubbabel was supposed to not build a copy of the old one. He was actually supposed to build this one, but he didn't do it. So that's a theory. He missed the memo. A second theory is that this is a third temple that will be physically built. Now that theory was proposed by a medieval rabbi called Moses Maimonides. He's quite a popular rabbi for Jewish people to read and think about. So he proposed, oh no, this is going to be the third temple that will be rebuilt. That Ezekiel was not thinking of Zerubbabel, he was thinking into the future. And so that's a common theory. Some people think that this is going to be a temple built at the time of the millennium. Now, the discussion of the millennium is another whole subject. We will definitely be talking about that when we get to the book of Revelation. That it's only people who are premillennial that think that. Because postmillennial people don't believe a third temple will be rebuilt, and amillennial people don't believe there's going to be a literal millennium. So we'll discuss all of that later. So the fourth theory is that this is a spiritual temple. I believe that that's the case. And the fifth theory is that this is a different picture of the New Jerusalem, which is in the book of Revelation, because that was also a building described symbolically with measurements. I think that's also true. So I think the fourth and the fifth theory is the same thing. So the five theories, that this is the temple that should have been built, they missed the memo. This is the temple, a third temple that will be built, the Moses Maimonides idea. Some people think this is going to be a millennial temple, which could also be the third physical temple of Moses Maimonides, according to that theory. Some people think it's a spiritual temple. Some people think it's the New Jerusalem. I think number 4 and number 5 are right. They're the same thing. So in Ezekiel chapter 47, there's a river that flows out from the throne. So there's like an altar that's going to be described. We haven't got to that yet. There's the river that flows out from under the east door of this temple, and this river gets deeper and deeper and deeper. We're going to get to chapter 47, but it's very, very obvious. Rivers don't get bigger as they go along without other rivers adding into them. But this river all on its own gets deeper and deeper and deeper, and it flows down the hill into the Dead Sea, which if you know Israel and you've been there, the Dead Sea is very dead. But this river gets deeper, so deep you can't stand and touch, and then it gets to the Dead Sea, and it turns the Dead Sea into a living lake, which is full of amazing fish, and there are all these trees that are constantly bearing fruit, and it sounds exactly like Revelation 21 and 22. It's obvious that that river is a spiritual river. So they could rebuild this building. You know, Zerubbabel could have rebuilt this building, but the river wouldn't have happened. You know, Moses Maimonides could be thinking this is some kind of third temple, but the river isn't there's not going to be a river flow out the doors of the temple that's going to purify the Dead Sea. It's clearly a spiritual metaphor. In other words, the whole it's you can't separate it and say, oh, half of it's spiritual and half of it's physical. No, the whole thing is a spiritual metaphor teaching us about something that's very real, and we need to understand it. I think it is a spiritual temple. The river that flows out is also a spiritual river, but I think it is also a picture of the New Jerusalem. It's both of them at the same time. We'll say more about it as we go along. Lord, I thank you for this picture of the third temple. I thank you that it's alive right now in the world, that it's the body of Christ, that we're a part of it, and that there are living streams of living water that flow out of us because of Christ, and they minister to people and bear fruit. I thank you for it. You've given us this wonderful picture, and I pray you'd help us to understand it more and more. Amen.